welcome to Whispers of Ink. I'm Machado de Assis, and now I will read one of my stories.
Let's start with the book Venus, Divine Venus, which is part of my novels collection. Chapter 1. Venus, Divine Venus. The words burst from Ricardo's lips like a prayer. He tore his gaze from the wall, where a tiny plaster copy of the Venus de Milo stood, and threw himself back into his writing. 2 lines came to him suddenly, completing a stanza he had started at 7 in the morning. It was already 7:30. The cup of coffee his mother had left for him before going to Mass sat untouched and cold on the pine table. His bed was still unmade, a narrow iron bed. In the corner of the small room sat a pair of shoes, and a hat hung from a nail. The place was messy and clearly poor. Ricardo sat in old slippers, his left hand supporting his head as he worked. He had just finished the stanza and read it again. Soft flower that rules above all flowers of the field below, you have the perfect shape of love, like Venus, whom all hearts know. The last 2 lines didn't feel as strong to him as the first ones. They didn't flow as easily either. He tapped the edge of the table with frustration and sat up straighter. He adjusted his mustache, looked again at the Venus on the wall, a sad plaster copy, and tried again to find the right words. He was 20 years old. His eyes were light and small. His face had no strong character, neither handsome nor ugly, just plain. His hair shined with oil, which he applied every day. His teeth were carefully taken care of. His hands were thin, like his feet, and his nails were long and curved. He worked at one of the naval arsenals, lived with his mother. His father had passed away and paid for the house and part of their food. She paid for the rest. Despite being old, she still worked hard. They lived in the Cajueros neighborhood. The year was 1859. It was a Sunday. When we say his mother had gone to Mass, it's easy to picture her in a worn black dress. Ricardo kept writing. He had a strange habit. When stuck with the rhythm of a line, he didn't bite his nails like others might. Instead, he gently rubbed the tip of his nose with his fingers, thinking, searching for the right words. Ricardo tried to come up with 2 new lines to replace the old ones, but nothing came to him. After a while, he just kept repeating the 2 lines he had already written until he started to believe they were actually good. That gave him the push he needed. He went on to finish the 2nd stanza, then the 3rd, the 4th, and finally the 5th. The last stanza said that the true God, wanting to prove that false gods were not as powerful as people thought, had created Marcella, beautiful and strong, to challenge the lovely Venus herself. He loved the idea. It felt like a golden key, unlocking something deep inside him. He stood up and walked around the room, reciting his poem out loud. Then he stopped in front of his small copy of the Venus de Milo statue, completely lost in thought. He stared at it and said aloud, almost like a whisper, "The arms you lost, they belong to her now." He liked that too, and tried to turn it into another stanza, but his inspiration had dried up. He copied the whole poem first into a notebook with other poems, then carefully onto a piece of fancy paper. Just as he finished writing, his mother came back from church. He barely had time to hide everything in the drawer. She noticed he hadn't drunk the coffee she had made for him and left on the table, still warm. It must be those cursed verses again, she thought to herself. Yes, Mom, it was those cursed verses, he said out loud. Maria dos Anjos was shocked. How did you know what I was thinking? Ricardo could have told her he had heard her say that many times before, always with the same little gesture. But he chose to lie instead. The poet knows. Inspiration isn't just for writing poems, it also helps you read minds. So you also read that I prayed for you during Mass today. I did. And that I asked Our Lady, my own protector, to help you get over this silly love for that girl. What's her name again? Ricardo stayed quiet for a moment before answering. Marcela. Right, Marcela. I didn't say the name out loud, but Our Lady knows it anyway. I'm not saying you're not good enough for her. I don't even know her. But Ricardo, you can get serious about her. She's a doctor's daughter. She won't want to wash or iron for you. Ricardo felt a deep sense of disgust. The idea of washing and ironing clothes seemed beneath him. It was the kind of thinking you'd expect from someone with a simple, even good heart, but still, it felt small. He pushed the feeling aside and looked at his mother with a mix of kindness and quiet superiority. At lunch he told her, Marcela is the most amazing girl in the neighborhood. Do you think angels come to earth, Mother? Yes, my son, but angels eat and marry when they're here. If you're so eager to see me married, why not marry Felizmina? Your cousin loves you very much. Felizmina? Come on, Mother. She isn't rich, I know. She is poor. Who said anything about money? But Felizmina, just the name Alana, can you imagine anything more ridiculous? She didn't pick it. Her father did when she was baptized. Well, that doesn't make it sound any better. Besides, I don't like her. She's plain. Her nose is too long, her shoulders are narrow, and she has no charm. Her eyes look dead like rotten fish, and she speaks so slowly. Honestly, she feels like someone from the countryside. I'm from the countryside too, my son, his mother replied gently. Ricardo finished lunch, then spent the day restless but happy, reading poetry. He had books by Casimiro de Abreu, Sores de Pasos, and Lamartine. He even had some of his own poems, handwritten and carefully kept. That night, he went to Marcela's house. He had made up his mind. He had already written many verses for her, though he had never given any to her until now. The truth was, the romance Maria dos Anjos feared might end in marriage had not gone beyond a few glances. It had been going on for about 6 weeks. It was Marcela's brother who had introduced Ricardo to her. The two young men had met by chance at a local fabric shop in the afternoons. Marcela's brother had said Ricardo was a very talented young man. Marcela, who was quite beautiful, never let a pair of eyes pass her by without asking something about them. And since the answers were always positive, she would pretend not to understand and keep asking questions. Ricardo didn't hesitate. His answer came fast and full of energy. That was all it took for them to keep going in circles, dancing around the same unspoken feelings. Still, not a single word passed between them, nothing clear, nothing official. Even their hands, when they touched, were hesitant. His fingers felt weak in hers, and hers felt even weaker in his. Today, I'll do it, he thought. Today's the day. But today wasn't as simple as he hoped. There were people at Dr. Viana's house, Marcela's father, and the place was full of guests. Someone was playing the piano, and Marcela looked at Ricardo the way she always did, with that quiet question in her eyes. "What do you think of me today?" He answered the same way he always did with his eyes. "Beautiful. Angelic." He checked his pocket one more time. The poem was still there, tucked inside a pink envelope. In one corner, a golden dove marked the letter like a secret promise. "This evening, we'll have a solo performance," said the doctor's son, pulling Ricardo aside. "And this gentleman here," he said, pointing to another guest, "is an excellent partner for cards." Ricardo tried to say numero, he really did. But he couldn't. He didn't know how. So he followed them to a small room next to the living area, where the lights were dimmer and the cards were already on the table. For about an hour and a half he stayed there, pretending to play, pretending to care. Finally he stood up and said, "I'm tired. I need to stretch my legs. I'll be right back." He walked straight to the main room. Marcela was at the piano. Next to her stood a young man with long, thick mustaches. He was getting ready to sing something from an old Italian opera. Ricardo couldn't remember which. The man was a tenor. He sang, and the crowd loved it. Loud applause filled the room. Ricardo stood by the window and clapped too. He watched Marcela's hands dance across the keys. He waited for her to look up, to meet his eyes. Inside his head he rehearsed the line again. "You are the most beautiful, the purest, the most divine of all angels. You are queen of my heart and my life." But when he finally saw her glance his way, she had already moved. She sat down between two friends, and from there, she turned to Ricardo and asked softly, "Do I look pretty to you?" "You are the most beautiful." He couldn't finish. She had already looked away. Then, she asked the same thing to the tenor, her eyes now on him. "Do I look pretty to you?" He answered with the same language of the eyes, but his look was stronger, clearer, like he had created the very idea of love just for her. Ricardo didn't wait for another question. He didn't just answer. He stared at her and said, "And me? What do you think of me?" Marcela didn't hesitate. She looked back and said, "A handsome groom." Ricardo turned pale. He didn't just understand the words. He felt them. He heard the tone. And he watched the scene play out like it wasn't even real. Who was this guy? Where had he come from? It turned out he was a young doctor. He had arrived just a few days ago from Bahia. His name was Machado. He was introduced to Marcela's father, and he had dinner at their house. That night's gathering was in his honor. People said he was a fine doctor. A tenor voice. Very charming. Very well dressed. That's all Ricardo needed to hear. The rest of the night was torture. He barely saw her. He caught one or two quick glances, nothing more. He decided to leave early, just to show how much it hurt. But he didn't go straight home. He walked for over an hour, lost in anger and sadness. Talking out loud. Swearing he would forget her. Swear he would stop loving her. The next day he barely ate breakfast. He couldn't focus on work. Dinner was the same. At night, he locked himself in his room. The only comfort he found was in the poems he had written. He read them again and again, and they felt beautiful. They gave him strength. The kind of strength he had lost after that Sunday meeting. 3 days passed. He couldn't take it anymore. He went to Dr. Viana's house. When he arrived, he saw Machel already there, wearing his hat, waiting for the ladies to finish getting ready. They were going to the theater. A few minutes later, Marcella came down the stairs. She looked radiant. She didn't speak, but with her eyes she asked him, "How do I look in this dress?" He answered, "Beautiful." Then, with a little courage, he looked back and asked with his eyes, "Can I come too?" She didn't reply. She walked to the window to check the carriage. He didn't know how could he. That Machado had already made plans with the family. He was waiting for them at the theater. The next day, Ricardo went back to Marcella's house. He said he wanted to know how the play was. But really, he just wanted to see her. When he arrived, he found her sitting close to Machado, talking like they were old friends. The kind of trust she had never given to him. 15 days after their breakup, people started talking about the possibility of getting back together. 4 months later, they were married. I'd love to tell you that Ricardo cried, but he didn't. What he did have were curses, angry denials, wild promises, and threats, but, in the end, all of it turned into a poem titled Perjura. He published the poem, and to make sure everyone understood the message, he dated it the very day of the wedding. Meanwhile, Marcella was on her honeymoon and didn't read any newspapers except maybe the ones written in her husband's eyes. Love heals love, they say. And sure enough, there was no shortage of women ready to take on that charitable mission. A Fausta, a Dorothea, a Rosina, and others followed one after another, fluttering their wings over the poet's dreams. All of them shared the same muse. Venus, Venus, divine Venus. Verses poured out like rain. Rhymes chased other rhymes, tired of always being the same. Poetry gave strength to the young man's heart. Not all the women even knew about his love for them. It was enough that they existed, that they were beautiful, almost beautiful to enchant and inspire him. One of these women was only 16. Her name was Virginia, and she was the daughter of a notary. Ricardo made sure to bump into the father often, just to get closer to the girl's house. When they met, he was introduced as a poet. "Really?" said the notary. "I've always liked poetry. If it weren't for my job, I'd write a few sonnets myself. Back in my day, I used to write fables." "Do you like fables?" "Of course I do," Ricardo replied. "Lyric poetry is better in my opinion, but fables." "Better? I don't get it." "Fables have meaning, not to mention the charm of making animals talk." "Exactly." "Then why did you say lyric poetry is better?" "In a way." "What way?" "I mean, every form has its own beauty." "Like, for example?" Oh, examples aren't hard to find. The point is, you think lyric poetry is better than fables. Or do you not think that anymore? Well, it seems it's not better, Ricardo admitted. Then just say it's worse. The moonlight, mist, virgins, lake, stars, angel eyes, those are empty words, good only for clueless poets. Me? Aside from fables and satire, I don't even know what poetry is for. It just fills your head with nonsense and paper with foolishness. But Ricardo listened to all this grumpy nonsense from the notary just to get invited into his house, which wasn't hard. Really, because Virginia's father had a few old fables, and some unpublished ones too, and almost no one around to hear them, or maybe just plain no one at all. Virginia welcomed the young man warmly. He was the first to speak to her of love, because this time, our Ricardo didn't hold back. He didn't give her a direct, plain declaration. Instead, he slipped her poems secretly. She kept them to read later and would thank him the next day. Very sweet, she always said. I was just the secretary of the muse, he once replied. She dictated the verses. Do you know the muse? No. Look in the mirror. Virginia understood and blushed. And already, their hands had started saying something too. Her father often took them both to the public garden, entertaining them with fables. Ricardo was sure he was winning the girl's heart and waited for her 17th birthday before asking for her hand and her father's permission. But one day, 4 months after they met, Virginia fell seriously ill, dangerously close to death. Ricardo truly suffered. He didn't think to write poems, nor did he feel inspired. But a chance reading of that elegy by Lamartine, with the line Elle avait 6 ans, c'est bientôt pour mourir, gave him the idea to write something using that as an epigraph. And he worked on it night, morning, even walking in the street just because of that line. Elle avait 6 ans, c'est bientôt pour mourir. He kept repeating to himself as he walked. Thankfully, after 15 days, Virginia pulled through. As soon as she could, she went to recover at her godmother's house in Tijuca. Virginia recovered quickly, but she didn't return right away. She stayed away for 1 month, then 2. Since they didn't write to each other, Ricardo naturally felt anxious. The notary told him the air was good up there, that his daughter was still weak and wouldn't come back until she was fully recovered. One day, the notary read Ricardo a fable he had written the night before. He dedicated it to Bachelor Vieira, the godson's nephew. Did you understand the meaning? He asked at the end. Yes, sir. I understood that the sun, wanting to give life back to the moon. And you still don't get it? The moral is clear. I believe it is, but what about the timing? The timing. The timing is my little girl's wedding to Bachelor Vieira. He arrived from São Paulo. They liked each other. The proposal happened the day before yesterday. This new disappointment completely stunned the young man. Heartbroken, he swore to forget all women and muses. After all, weren't muses just another kind of woman? He told his mother about his decision, without giving too many details, and she fully supported him. From that moment on, he stayed home during the evenings and nights. He stopped going for walks and meeting girls. He didn't write poetry anymore and even thought about breaking his statue of the Venus de Milo. One day, he heard that Felizmina, his cousin, was getting Maria Donna Maria dos Anjos asked him for 5 or 10,000 rei to buy a small gift. As soon as he received his salary, he gave her 10,000 rei. "Who is she marrying?" he asked. "A young man who works for the railroad company." Ricardo agreed to go with his mother in the evening to visit his cousin. When they arrived, he saw the groom sitting next to her on the sofa, whispering to her softly. After the introductions, Ricardo leaned against the corner of a window. A few minutes later, the groom walked over to him. "I'm very glad to meet you," he said. "I have a house ready for you whenever you need it, and a servant to attend to you." He already called him cousin. "I know my cousin is a poet," the groom added. Ricardo shrugged, clearly uninterested. "Venus, divine Venus." "I heard you're a great poet," she said. "Who told you that?" "People who know. Your cousin said you wrote beautiful verses." Ricardo paused for a few seconds. "I wrote verses. Probably won't write them again." A moment later, the engaged couple were together again, whispering quietly. Ricardo felt jealous. They seemed happy, clearly in love. He even thought she looked more in love, because she kept smiling, maybe just to show off her beautiful teeth. The kind only God could give. Her walk had more grace too. Love changes women, he thought. She's better than she was before. The groom, though, seemed a bit annoying. Only calling him cousin all the time, what was that about? He told his mother on the way home. "What's wrong with that?" she asked. That night, he dreamed he was at Felizmina's wedding. There were many carriages, flowers, and she wore white from head to toe. The groom wore a white tie and a black tailcoat. There was a big dinner, toasts, and Ricardo recited some verses. "If no one else does, I will," he said out loud, the next morning as he got out of bed. From that moment on, Felizmina's image wouldn't leave his mind. A few days later, when he went to her house, he saw her talking to the groom. He felt a sudden urge to throw the man out the window. Later, he learned the groom was leaving the next morning for work in Barra do Piraí. "Will he be gone long?" 8 days, she said. Ricardo visited his cousin every night during that time. She, frightened by the feeling she saw growing in her cousin, didn't know what to do. At first, she decided not to see him. But she did see him, and she listened to everything he had to say, looking straight into his eyes. Her mother had poor eyesight, so she didn't notice much. The day before the groom came back, Ricardo held her hand tightly, too tightly, and said goodbye. Until never again. Felizmina didn't dare ask him to come back. But she didn't sleep well that night. The groom returned 2 days later. 2 days? Ricardo asked when he met him on the street. "Yes, cousin." "I have a lot to do," the other man explained. Ricardo left, but the visits kept coming. Eyes spoke. Arms moved. Hands touched. A constant conversation, not made of thoughts or ideas, but of feelings and closeness. One night, he dreamed he held his cousin and climbed with her to the top of a rock in the middle of the ocean. He saw her without arms. When he woke up the next morning, he looked at his statue of Venus de Milo. "Venus, divine Venus." He sat at his desk, grabbed a sheet of paper, and began to write. He wanted to make something beautiful, a poem, at least a sonnet. He looked at Venus, who looked like his cousin, and wrote, erased, rewrote, and erased again. Slowly, the first 2 lines of the sonnet came to life. The others followed, piece by piece. Feliz Mina, he said out loud. Her name would be the golden key. It rhymed with divina and crystallina. And so he finished the poem. And you, my loved one, so divine, are not just a copy of Venus' design. You are her model, Feliz Mina. He gave it to her that night. She cried after reading it. She was already promised to another man. Ricardo heard those words and whispered in her ear, never. As the 15 days came to an end, her fiancé wrote saying he had to stay longer in Barra for 2 or 3 more weeks. The 2 young lovers, eager to be together, decided to move forward with their plans. When Maria dos Anjos heard from her son that he would marry his cousin, she was shocked. She asked him to explain. This can't be explained, mother, he said. And what about the other man? He is still in Barra. She already wrote to him, apologizing and telling the truth. Maria dos Anjos shook her head, looking disapproving. That's not right, Ricardo. But we love each other. Feliz Mina admitted she had agreed to marry him without love. She had always loved Ricardo. She only accepted the other proposal because she thought she had no choice. Yes, but she gave her word. What word, mother? If I adore her, and I tell her so, should I just stand back and watch, and let her do the same, just because of a mistake, a promise made without thinking? Feliz Mina is an angel. It was no coincidence that she was given a name that rhymed with divine. An angel, mother. I hope they will be happy, of course they will. You will see, mother. And so they were married. Ricardo gave himself entirely to the reality of love. He kept the Venus de Milo, that divine Venus, hanging on the wall, despite his wife's protests about modesty. It is worth knowing that the groom later married in Barra, and by that time, both Marcela and Virgilia were already wed. The other young women whom Ricardo had loved and written poems about also now had husbands. The poet stopped writing poetry, much to the sorrow of his admirers. One of them once asked him anxiously, "So, you don't write verses anymore?" "One cannot do everything," Ricardo replied, gently stroking the heads of his 5 children.
Thank you for listening so far. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like our channel and click the bell to be notified whenever a new book is read. Have you heard of Machado de Assis? Machado de Assis, born in Rio de Janeiro in 1839, is considered one of the greatest writers in Brazilian literature and a master of psychological realism. He was a novelist, poet, playwright, and short story writer whose works explore the complexities of human behavior with irony, subtlety, and deep introspection. Among his most famous novels are Dom Casmurro, which questions truth and memory, and the posthumous memoirs of Brás Cubas, a satirical narrative told by a deceased man. Machado's literature often reflects the contradictions of Brazilian society, addressing issues like race, class, power, and identity in a sophisticated yet accessible style. Despite being born into poverty and facing racial prejudice, Machado de Assis rose to become the president of the Brazilian Academy of Letters and a symbol of literary excellence. His sharp wit and profound observations about society and the human soul make his works timeless and universally relevant. Today, he is recognized not only as a Brazilian icon, but also as a world-class author whose legacy continues to influence generations of writers and thinkers. Machado de Assis shows us that literature can be both elegant and critical, intimate and universal, humorous and profound. His stories remain as powerful and thought-provoking today as they were more than a century ago. Machado is a treasure of world literature, and through his voice, we discover the infinite layers of the human experience.